Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott may be out of caucus, but the story of how that result unfolded continued to be told today. And no surprise, the various players offered different accounts. Tonight, we'll look at the latest from the women themselves and from some of their former colleagues. Katie Simpson has the details.
Over the leadership of the Liberal.
The urgent effort to keep Jody Wilson-Raybould on the Liberal team went right into this week. BC cabinet ministers who know her well were in her office as late as Monday, trying to reach some kind of truce.
There were issues that Jody raised, and I'm not going to get into the specifics because these were private conversations, but that simply were things that the Prime Minister and the caucus certainly couldn't agree to.
It became obvious there wasn't going to be a positive outcome, and the conversations just came to an end.
Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott were expelled from caucus 24 hours later, a move which brought to an end secret high-level negotiations to ease the internal tensions which have hurt the Prime Minister and his party.
We've worked for a number of weeks over the past while to try and come together on a path forward that would restore some of the trust that had been eroded. And unfortunately, it was obvious that we weren't able to do that.
I would have liked, all along, to have the Prime Minister come forward and accept some responsibility and to apologize to Canadians for what happened.
As CBC News first reported last night, sources say Wilson-Raybould came up with a list of at least 5 conditions she wanted met. It included firing 3 senior staffers, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing by Justin Trudeau, and confirmation the new Attorney General would respect her decision in the SNC-Lavalin case. Reports about that last condition irked some of her former colleagues who now cry hypocrisy.
But if the AG is supposed to be independent, what's a former AG doing directing a Prime Minister to direct the AG to make a determination on a case when new evidence could be presented?
The new Attorney General says he was unaware of any requests, not that he'd listen anyway.
If someone tries to direct me to do anything, the Prime Minister's never tried to direct me. If someone else tries to direct me, then they'll hear about it from me.
Jody Wilson-Raybould said in an email tonight, "I have never and would never seek to interfere with the exercise of prosecutorial discretion by the Attorney General of Canada." After Wilson-Raybould issued her statement to CBC News, we recontacted our sources for the original story. A source says Wilson-Raybould raised the demand her decision on SNC-Lavalin be respected directly with the Prime Minister during their conversations in Vancouver before she resigned from Cabinet. But the source says that condition was not part of the conversations in the recent days leading up to Tuesday's expulsion from caucus. Jane Philpott didn't want to get into specifics, but she did say today that the Prime Minister if he had made a quick and clear apology, perhaps this controversy would have been contained. Rosie.
All right, so here we are. At this point, I imagine no viable path back into the caucus for either former minister.
It doesn't look like it, but Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, says in the coming days she plans to approach both women to see if they want to join her team.
Okay, Katie Simpson in Ottawa on this developing story. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks.
So ask Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, and they say an apology from the Prime Minister would have gone a long way. But would it have made this whole thing go away? Well, that's the question At Issue is going to tackle tonight. Chantal, Andrew, and Chris Hall are all here.
The allegations in the Globe story this morning are false.
That was the Prime Minister's first response back in February to allegations the former Attorney General faced inappropriate political pressure on the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. And that's when things began to unravel, and fast. Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned from Cabinet. Gerald Butts, the Prime Minister's principal secretary, also resigned. There were hearings at the Justice Committee. Michael Warnick, the clerk of the Privy Council. Wilson-Raybould, Butts, Warnick again. Jane Philpott resigned. Warnick resigned. There were text messages and one audio recording released, all leading up to this week.
Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are no longer members of the Liberal caucus.
Now, the former Liberal MPs say this could have been avoided had the Prime Minister apologized.
To admit that mistakes were made, to apologize to Canadians for it.
To have the Prime Minister come forward and accept some responsibility and to apologize to Canadians.
So, does this all really come down to an apology? And where does the government and the opposition go from here? It's Thursday, and that means At Issue is here to try and make sense of it all. Goodness knows we've needed them through these many weeks. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Chris Holt joins us in Ottawa tonight. Good to see everybody. So let's start with where that little clip pack left off, this notion of an apology or an acceptance of responsibility or lack thereof. Given that we know that there were talks between people in the Prime Minister's office, people in caucus and in cabinet, and Jody Wilson-Raybould, do you think, Chantal, do you have a sense that would have solved things here in a way that we wouldn't be in this place where we are today?
I think that if that were ever going to happen, it would have happened on that famous morning when the Prime Minister, remember, after Gerald Butts testified, actually talked about a loss or a break in communications or whatever, but did not apologize. And I think that neither the clerk nor Gerald Butts in testimony laid the ground for the Prime Minister to say something bad happened and I apologize for it, because neither of them accepted or said that they felt that they did anything wrong or that they crossed any line.
But Andrew, if I imagine this message was clear to the PMO and to people inside government, that was really an important point for both of the women at the center of that. Is there a reason why the Prime Minister couldn't have done that? Would that have looked too weak? Would it have been admission of something? What would have been the danger in doing
Well, they embarked upon a strategy from the beginning that they were going to, first of all, deny this. And then once they got beyond denying, they were going to minimize it and say it wasn't really that bad a deal. We were just seeking information, or we were just wanting to give advice, or what have you. I don't think the issue is an apology. I mean, I know we in the media like that because we like things to be personal, et cetera. I think it's an accounting. And by accounting, I mean, first of all, a clear statement, transparency about what happened, and secondly, an admission that it shouldn't have happened, this was wrong. And instead what we've had is weeks of denial and deflection and red herrings and the kangaroo court of the Justice Committee in every attempt to block people from finding out what happened, and certainly no acknowledgement, including that prime ministerial press conference, that any of this was really wrong, that any lines were crossed, or that anything was unacceptable in trying to pressure the Attorney General into interfering in a criminal prosecution. And that, to me, is the nub of the issue. Whether he apologizes, says I'm sorry, is really, to me, irrelevant.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I'm using that word, but what I guess I really mean, and I think what the two ladies mean as well, is an admission that something happened. But Chris, don't we see through the actions taken by the Prime Minister's office that there is an admission that something didn't work the way it was supposed to here?
Yeah, he summed it a line and said, I think the communications could have been better. I understand that this was not the way it should have unfolded, but he's never said he's sorry. And I think that's what Jane Philpott, at least today, was implying was necessary. And I don't know how you apologize if you refuse to admit that you did anything wrong. I listened to Carla Qualtrough on News Network earlier today saying that she thought the Prime Minister had taken responsibility for the breakdown already. Carla Qualtrough, of course, is one of the people that sources said had been involved in trying to negotiate some kind of an agreement between the Prime Minister's office and both Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. So in the end, would an apology have sufficed? If done early enough, I suppose it could have nipped this in the bud. I really just don't see, having covered this the way we have with the he said, she said, he wrote, she wrote, he said, she taped, that we're ever going to get an apology to end this whole thing.
I certainly think as a matter of self-preservation, so let's leave aside, what should have been done, but just from a matter of political strategy, it would have been a much shorter story had they come out with everything the first day. One assumes. Usually that's the case. It was the case, for example, with the Nigel Wright-Michael Duffy thing. If they'd had a press conference the next day and taken accountability for it and explained what went on, it would have been bad for them, but it wouldn't have been as bad as the two-year story it became. I think this is very similar. The one caveat I would say to that is they may have had good reason not to want to fess up, because there may be more to this that we don't know.
Okay, so on this, I agree with Andrew totally, that if they'd done this from day one, we wouldn't be talking about this tonight.
No, yeah.
I'm not sure, though, that it is because there's so much more to find out. And I'm based this in part on interviews given this week by both Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould, who say that they feel that the basic facts are out in the open. But if there has been one consistent line from people around Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau, is that to this day they are convinced that they did nothing wrong and they crossed no line. And I think we're going to be left with that from them as of now.
What I find interesting, though, about the reporting that we did last night and some today is the what seems to be a very serious attempt, I would say, on both sides, whether it be with Jody Wilson-Raybould or with people around the Prime Minister or members of caucus, over like a 5-week period to try and reach some sort of agreement. What does that tell you?
Well, all I can say about that is I can't think of another Prime Minister, make of that what you want, who would have negotiated for all that time. At some point, the fish or cut bait issue should have come much earlier if they were not going to resolve it. We were leaked the demands that were made by Jody Wilson-Raybould. I can't think again of Jean Chrétien or Brian Mulroney or Stephen Harper negotiating on that basis. So to me, it speaks of amateur hour in the PMO and nothing more than that.
I take a somewhat different view of this. Yeah. I think it is a recognition that Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould represented something very important to both this Prime Minister and to this government. One, an Indigenous woman who's from British Columbia, which is an important province for the Liberals, with the TMX pipeline still in the offing, and Jane Philpott, who handles some very difficult files, including the Indigenous Services file. So I think he bent over backwards in the sense of trying to be able to find a way out and to keep these two players in his caucus at the very least. But by the time he finally got around to acknowledging that he couldn't, it was now a point of where he had to expel them from caucus, which I'm sure, from having listened to people around this place, was the last thing that they really wanted to do.
Yeah, Andrew? I guess I take yet a third view of it, which is
good. Yeah.
I'm not sure there needed to be that much negotiation. What she was asking was not unreasonable. It was take accountability for what happened, hold to account the worst offenders, 2 of whom have already gone, and make sure it doesn't happen again. I agree if you're looking at it purely from a standpoint of sticking to your story and not conceding anything wrong was done, I can understand why he wouldn't do it. But from the standpoint of if you had no bad story to tell, if you were perfectly innocent of the charges, then it seems to me, as from the word go on this thing, you would have been perfectly happy to do exactly what she was asking. So I understand why he'd be a stick in the mud on it, but I don't think it justifies it.
Okay, all of our faces said something there. Go ahead, Chantal. Yeah.
I would just quarrel with one thing. I've read that list, and one of those conditions was ensuring that the next Attorney General not review her own decision on SNC-Lavalin. I can't imagine that an Attorney General who wants to be independent could be told on the basis of some backroom political deal between his predecessor and the Prime Minister that he cannot come to his own decision on a file.
Well, it's not at all...
but if the issue is the independence of the Attorney General, you cannot tie him down to the decision of his predecessor. That would be, on the face of it, an unacceptable condition. Plus, if you are the Prime Minister and you're told that you should own up to something and you agree to that, but then fire everyone around you that acted on your orders, what does that say about you? That you're willing to throw everyone overboard when you yourself admit responsibility. So if you were going to meet those conditions, I think at the end of the day, if you were Justin Trudeau, you'd be better off just resigning.
Yeah, on that first point, we only have one side's interpretation of this, and it requires, it seems to me, heroic amounts of bad faith to assume that what she meant by that was not that she didn't want the Prime Minister to apply the same pressure to the AG, to the new AG as he applied to her, that he didn't want him directing him to do a DPA. That, it seems to me, the more plausible interpretation than to say she suddenly reversed herself on the whole principle she'd been fighting for the last 7 weeks and for months before that, and suddenly decided she was in favor of the Prime Minister interfering with an AG. It seems to me that requires an amazing amount of bad faith to interpret it that way.
But to testimony, she did say that she had decided in her mind when she accepted another cabinet position that she would resign if her successor changed the decision, which actually
she's entitled to do.
Doesn't go to your interpretation.
No,
but
I want to pull back if I can. I also heard that issue was removed from the list as sort of these negotiations went on. So it was there. Whether it stayed, I don't know. I just want to ask the not so simple question about where the government goes from here. Both the MPs, the 2 women are out doing some interviews today, tomorrow, in the coming days. But as Chantal rightly points out, they don't, either of them seem to suggest that there is more that they have to offer. So this will just be their perspective. So what happens now? What does the government hope for? Is there any room there for them to change anything, or are they really, damaged in a serious way now and can't recover before the election, Chantal?
The Prime Minister's brand is certainly damaged, and you saw it this week when he spoke to the Daughters of the Vote, and that was a microcosm of the reaction out there. For some people who believe that he was on the right side of the issue, he has come across as weak, and for others, he has been on the wrong side of the issue. So it's a lose-lose. I'm not convinced that the story is entirely played out, not the SNC-Lavalin story, but what happens to Jody, Wilson-Raybould, and Jane Philpott. Frankly, if I were the NDP, I'd been trying really hard to get at least one of them to come on board.
Okay, Chris talked to the leader of the NDP today, so I'll let him pick up there.
Well, yeah, he's open to having conversations with them, Jagmeet Singh says, but there's some issues with Jody Wilson-Raybould. His own party was very critical of some of the files that she handled around assisted dying, for example. So I think that would be a harder sell. Maybe Jane Philpott. It's difficult riding for the NDP, but I take Chantal's point that it would be certainly worth their while to do so. To your main question, though, I'm not sure that the Liberals have to do anything more now than just simply really continue to hammer away at the budget they put out there and hope that that takes over if there's nothing else to come out. The narrative that comes out of this place, Justin Trudeau has taken questions almost on a regular basis, if not daily basis, through the midst of this. He's been damaged, I think, his brand as a feminist and perhaps even as a man who believed that the Indigenous relationship was the most important. By getting rid of these two people, it would send the opposite signal. But if the worst is up behind him now, with a budget that still hasn't been fully debated and explored, I think they at least have the option now, or the opportunity now, to change the channel.
Last minute to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, the government is in possession of most of the cards in any situation like this. I still think the government has shown an unrivaled ability to shoot themselves in the foot on this. What was accomplished positively for them, again, just from a narrowly partisan point of view, by kicking Philpott and Wilson-Raybould out of caucus is still defeats me. I do not understand how that.
I can tell you that the MPs here are pretty okay with it.
No, I'm sure they are.
It may just be that simple, though.
It doesn't answer my question as to how that benefits them as a party. But that being done, it's going to be hard for the opposition to keep this going much longer. But the damage, to some extent, will have been done to the Prime Minister's image and to the parties. Some of that will fade by election time, but not all of it.
Okay, got to leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week, we're talking about the fate of the new NAFTA deal. Remember that? 15 news cycles ago. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our websites.